Okay, well, hi, hello, and welcome to The Future of Identity Security, a Leadership Perspective. Today's fascinating webinar is sponsored by Sphere and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, a future B2B company, and I'm so happy that I get to be your moderator for this webinar today because this is kind of a one of a kind, right? This is a little bit of an exclusive experience we are about to embark on together here as a group because we have with us an innovative and insightful group of leaders who are actually going to help us walk through the realities of today's identity security challenges. And these impactful experts are going to outline things with the current challenges that probably a lot of you are facing in your organization, maybe things that you're already thinking about, maybe some things that you haven't started thinking about. And then, and this is the best part, we're going to get into those high-level strategies, practical guidance, and best practices. We are going to unpack some of their greatest lessons learned and their top predictions for the way ahead. So maybe you are joining us today because you're in a leadership position yourself and you want to kind of hear some other brainstorm ideas, or maybe you are looking to better understand what those perspectives are so that you can make those effective arguments for projects or priorities to your leadership team when you need to. So whatever the case, you are going to get something out of our conversation today. This is absolutely a thrilling opportunity. So grab your coffee now, make sure you've got that ready, turn off all your cell phone alerts, get comfortable, put your feet up, and let's jump in. I am going to take you through a few housekeeping points that will just help you get the most out of our time here together today. I want to start out with a little bit of a tour of your audience console. If you haven't joined us before, there are three very important tabs over on the right-hand side I want to make sure you're aware of. We've got chat, docs, and Q&A. Let's start in the chat tab. Chat tab has all kinds of wonderful humans here connecting already. I see a John, I see a Brent. Hey, Julie, good to see you. I saw Gilbert earlier, and we've got Venkat and Melissa and Morteza and Vrej. Oh my gosh, we got a whole wonderful crew. Keep those highs and hellos coming as we go through our day. This is a great part of these webinars is you all being able to connect with one another. And I know that our speakers want the day to be really interactive. So post thoughts, ideas, things that are resonating with you. You've tried that, it has worked. Maybe you tried that and it didn't work and you want to tweak it a little bit. You can roll some ideas around with the folks here in our community in that chat tab. So that's the chat tab. Take two little bunny hops over to the Q&A tab. This is where you're going to get your questions in directly to our expert presenters. So they are making sure that we leave some time for Q&A at the end so that they can get into these questions with you. So make sure you've got your best, most insightful, inquisitive questions locked away in that Q&A tab and get them in throughout our session today. All right, so that was chat, highs and hellos, getting to know each other, sharing ideas. I like it. Sean's giving me a 10-4. And then we've got our Q&A tab where we are asking questions directly of our speakers. All right, right smack dab in the middle of those two tabs is the docs tab. There's some great resources and takeaways there. I want to call out the book a demo tab. That is going to be a very important follow-up because as we all know, you get a lot of good information, but the best thing to do is get in the sandbox. So make sure you've got that tab open. Make sure you get signed up for your demo before you head out today. All right, last few important points. We do have closed captioning available for you on the webinar console here. If that would help enhance your webinar viewing experience, make sure you've got those closed captions on. If you need any help today, you can post in the chat window and reach out to the one and only Deanna, who is here with us. She would be very happy to help you out, and she's also happy to just say hi. But before you reach out to Deanna, you can try enabling light mode on your audience console there. And you can also try a browser refresh. That's the have you tried turning it off and on again, right? That gets rid of almost all the gremlins. So if one of them gets in the system today, browser refresh, light mode, and then you can post for Deanna there in the chat if you need anything. Last but not least, we do have a $250 Amazon gift card that we will be giving away at the end of our webinar. Now, you do need to be here all the way through with us at the webinar. You got to be here live. You got to hang out. You got to be a part of the day, and then you are qualified to win. You also do need to meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. Those are linked for you in the docs tab. I keep getting distracted by the chat because you guys are all being really wonderful and active, and I love it. So keep those coming in. All right, well, speaking of chat and wonderful humans, let's get our speakers on out because we've got quite a crew with us and a lot of great content in store. And I want to hand things over to Rita Gurevich, CEO of Sphere, who is going to be our moderator and guide through this conversation. Her panelists with her today, Lenin Cruz, Senior Vice President, Global Identity and Access Management and Data Security at Northern Trust. That's a lot of important things, Lenin. And Ramin Safai, CISO Point 72. All right, let's get our wonderful speakers on out here with us and we can get this conversation started. Hi, crew. There we go.
Hello.
We're just missing Lenin. Here we go. Rita, this is an absolute rock star group. I can't wait to hear from all of you. I'm going to hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess. Great introduction as usual. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Very excited to see the chat, just like Jess mentioned. I'm Rita Gurevich. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion on the future of identity security. And clearly, I have two leaders that really know a thing or two about this topic, so I can't wait to dive in. Thank you both, Ramin and Lenin, for joining us. Let me tell everyone just a little bit about myself before I ask Lenin and Ramin to share a little bit about their backgrounds. So if you don't know Sphere, we are an identity intelligence solution, and we've essentially automated the find it, fix it, and forget about it problems that folks have across identity. So that's not what this session's about at all, but the marketing team had to throw in a book a demo at the end. So if you are interested in learning more, by all means, we'd love to speak with you. But I'd actually love, Ramin, maybe to kick us off, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've been a CISO for a while. You've seen a thing or two, huh?
Indeed. So first of all, I saw my photo there. That was from a while back. So I should definitely update my photo. I should remember to do that. You too look the same, I thought. So I appreciate that. So I have been the CISO at Point72 for the past 2.5 years. Point72 is a hedge fund based in New York City, but operates globally, with about 5,000 employees across the globe. Our founder is Steve Cohen, who also owns New York Mets. So I do get involved in New York Mets cybersecurity as well, which is quite exciting and brings some level of difference from what I call the day-to-day finance areas. Before Point72, I was the CISO at Jefferies for about 12 years. That's another financial service. They're more in the investment banking area, and they're based in New York City as well.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure your kids say, wow, I have the cool dad on the block. His boss owns the New York Mets.
Steve definitely does.
Lenin, tell us a little bit about your background. Northern Trust, important company, important space you're in. Share a little bit if you don't mind.
Sounds good. I don't have such exciting time as Ramin does when it comes to sports teams, but I work for Northern Trust, who is a large financial institution in the Midwest, based in Chicago. We have multiple business units. We're in the asset management business, as well as the custody bank business. There's probably 3 in the United States that really do a great deal of that work. In terms of where I come from, my original discipline from a learning perspective had been data and data security, right? And one of the things that we always run into was, what about the access to the data? So as time went on, I had a great stint at USAA doing a lot of data security there. Went on to Northern Trust from there, and really began the process of not only working in the data security space, but that really evolved into identity and access management space as well. So that's a little bit of my background. Been in IT and cyber primarily for about 15 years, doing anything from network security all the way up into now identities. So that's where I come from.
That's incredible. And I love that you understand the data problem alongside the identity problem, because something I always say is identity is the vehicle, but oftentimes data is the prize.
It's the prize, correct. You can't fix your data problem without fixing the identity problem. That is actually absolutely true, especially from a zero trust perspective.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So before we dive in, everybody, I have a ton of really insightful, thoughtful questions I'm going to ask both Ramin and Lenin. But what I'd like to do is actually open up a poll. So I'm going to open it up and I'm going to show it on the screen. So that way, as we're asking the next couple of questions, you guys can start sharing some information, right? So one question that I would love to hear from the audience is, what do you see as the biggest barrier to advancing your identity security strategy? Is it the fact that you don't know all the different identities that exist, whether they're human or non-human? Is it the fact that your company lives in hybrid world where you have a ton of foundational systems that need protection as well as cloud environments? Is your struggle getting leadership to really understand why this is important and allocate funding from a people and a dollar perspective? Or is your challenge that nobody's actually raising their hand and saying, I own identity security and I'm accountable to the programs and I'm going to drive the direction? So we're going to come back to that in just a moment. If you please go to the polls area, I see people are starting to fill it in. I'm going to stop sharing it now, but by all means, please continue to fill in the poll. We'll come back to that in a minute, but Ramin, I'm going to pick on you first, if you don't mind. Question for you. I've known you for a long time, Ramin. I've seen you lead incredible security programs at some of the most interesting, largest global financial services companies. And what I've learned is typically in those kinds of organizations, the tolerance for risk is sometimes basically zero. So what lessons can other industries take away from how financial services approaches identity security, especially when it comes to non-human identities and the crazy AI world that everyone's starting to?
Wow, that's a good question. First of all, how come you didn't have all of the above in the previous poll? I would have voted for all of the above because you had so many good attributes. I wanted to say, you know what? I suffer from every one of them. So yeah, I think that's a very good question. So let me share with you, as a hedge fund, obviously one of the key things about hedge funds and the differentiator between hedge funds, what I like about hedge funds, is that they move really fast and they want to innovate as fast as they can. So one of the things that have been happening is rolling out AI at a very rapid pace into the organization. And of course, my job is to make sure it stays secure. So bringing that security and that AI journey that the company wants to work on at the same time, at times can be what I call very non-complementary, because I have to be a barrier to rapid adoption because we don't have the security architecture right. And when it comes to the security, what we're noticing with AI is that really the only security and one of the key security areas is identity. So identity is the control plane. One of the key securities that we have is in that space. The agentic AI is adding a lot more complexity to that because we don't want to give, as an example, accounts access to service accounts, unlimited access to things, and then suddenly give a user access to that service account to act on their behalf. So creating ever more complexity in there. So what have we been doing? Clean up and making sure we have the ownership alignment has been the key. One of the first things I did when I joined Point72 was to do a cleanup of any what I call non-restricted access to systems. If there was a share file that was open to everything, or a folder that was open to all users, AI will find it and will use it, even though you may not know you have access to it. So making sure that we remove this access to all is one of the key lessons that I want to share. The other one is that we are really changing the way we think about access certification, the typical IGA process, and granting of access. We are moving more towards what I call just in time. You only get access just in time, and you constantly are certifying. Like if we see anomalies, we immediately ask the owner to do a certification rather than wait and then 6 months later go to them and say, oh, this account actually did something. Is this yours? Are you okay with it? That really doesn't work in that speed that AI is moving. But the non-human identity is really, and I hope we go deeper into this, non-human identity is definitely one of the key areas. Right now, the architecture we have is that we are treating non-human identities like human identities, and we are treating them as first-class citizens, meaning that they have to go through the same process of getting access, same process of actually getting certified. Whether that will be the future architecture, I don't know, but at least that's the starting point we have.
Very interesting. So I love that you said identity is the control plane, right? I've heard identity is the new perimeter, and there's lots of fun taglines that I've heard, but I love identity as the control plane. And is it fair to say that you feel that by focusing on identity, particularly cleanup, ownership, certification with IGA, does that give companies like a leg up in securing AI agents? Is that a foundation that will help companies?
Yeah, because AI suddenly exposes the access that you had or the service account had, and they didn't know it has that access because it scans and basically finds everything in there. So if you don't have that right, you just can't turn it on. So it was a prerequisite before, for example, we could turn on Copilot from Microsoft, that we made sure all of our SharePoints are cleaned up, all of our OneDrives are cleaned up, that no one can go ahead and give access, unrestricted access to all users. So that was like a prerequisite. If you don't turn that on, opening up Microsoft Copilot is a futile exercise, because suddenly you're opening up SharePoints and OneDrives that people have accidentally opened to the company and you just don't know it. So yes, my answer is, for every part of the AI that you're looking at, you need to make sure that the access to the systems that it has access to are verified.
Very interesting. And by the way, lots of people are starting to answer the poll. That's very exciting. I can't wait to show the results to everyone, but we'll come back to some of your points, Ramin, in a little bit. Lenin, I'm going to ask you an interesting question, because I think about this specific topic all the time. You know, you've done zero trust before, right? And I think zero trust has traditionally been framed around the network, right? But today, identity, as Ramin so elegantly said it, identity is really the new control plane, right? So from your experience running very large-scale programs, what does it take to make zero trust truly identity centric? And where do you think a lot of organizations fall short?
Gotcha. So I think one of the pieces that makes a good zero trust program. Zero trust, it's almost at times like a cliche, right? Everybody is doing zero trust, and no one's doing zero trust because everybody's doing it. And so from the perspective of what makes a good program from a zero trust perspective when it comes to identity centric points of view, is having a unified identity platform, right? I know that sometimes you have to have hybrid environments where you maybe have Active Directory as well as Entra. So figuring out a way to bring those together, and really having a centralized identity across cloud and on-prem. A lot of us run a very hybrid environment most of the time, and so we need to be able to make those two cohesive so that you know where every identity is where. The other piece too is making sure that you have very modern, phishing resistant, MFA as part of the process, and be able to step up authentication along the way when somebody is going to a different view or different perspective, not to trust any tokens just because they exist or they're available, right? And then going back to what Ramin said is having a good IGA foundation, making sure that all of the applications really fall within the framework of identity governance and administration, to make sure that we automate that life cycle of those identities. One of our biggest things, everywhere I've been, is making sure that the right entitlements apply to the right people, to the right things along the way, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Right? So implementing the IGA solution to apply to that hybrid environment is also very important. The other one too that's important from a successful identity-centric zero trust standpoint is having the adaptive policies. So just in time, using real-time signals, as Ramin also mentioned, right? Making sure that we find out location, behavior of where the identity is, so that we're able to identify what it's doing and at what time. Having conditional access at a very large scale, right? Making sure that you align the right user to access the right cloud resource or the right internal resource at the appropriate time, whenever it is. For example, having time-bound approaches to access, right? If I am a user in the US, should I be accessing a resource in the middle of at 3 a.m.? Well, maybe that's the case, but having those pieces, and then just having a good telemetry, right? Good reporting, really having a like identity centric microsegmentation, and just the least privilege principle is key when you want to do zero trust. What is the least amount of access that I need to be able to execute the function that I'm doing at the time? And if I need to elevate my privileges, I should be just in time or time bound, right? So that's one of the pieces that also brings us to that critical part of it. Where I think it's also important is the usages of SSO, making sure you have context-aware access by using proxies among other things, or your CASB along the way. Where I think they fall short is really when you're just kind of treating identity as an afterthought. And many organizations, I think, Ramin, you and I were talking at some point, like the identity team sits in infrastructure, or really should be an information security function. Those are the kinds of things that I think are afterthoughts that are not only brought into the forefront when you have issues. And that's one of the, I think, key pieces. And then just over-reliance in legacy MFA, right? Stuff that doesn't have phishing-resistant approach to it. So those are the things that I think come to mind as you're beginning to put an identity-centric zero trust model.
Fascinating. You gave so many good answers. I was trying to write them all down as fast as possible, but I'm sure I can call you and you can share with me and I can share with the audience. But one thing you said specifically.
100%. The one thing, Rita, I think also important is identifying where your identities are. A lot of us don't have that key point, right? Where are the identities living today, and where do we have to actually have them to be used? Is something that I think I've found to be lacking in terms of being effective there.
So you actually just gave me the perfect segue back to see some of these poll results, because two of the options were around visibility, right? Being able to see where the identities actually live. And you also talked about centralized identity across cloud and on-prem. And that is a challenge, that complexity of all the sins of the past, plus all the cloud environments that we're all moving towards. So let's take a quick look about how people answered. Let's see. Okay, all right. So a lot of people felt the lack of visibility is actually, one of the biggest barriers. We got a bunch of folks that also agreed around that hybrid world, the legacy plus the new cloud environments, a little bit of the budget from the executives, and unclear ownership. So why don't we talk a little bit about the one that most folks, or a lot of folks, voted for, right? The lack of visibility into all identities, human and non-human. So Ramin, I'm going to start with you. How do you think companies start by overcoming this challenge? And you can't say just use Fearboard. Or you can.
I think Lenin actually mentioned the fact that having centralized architecture, and I think having centralized authentication authorization architectures is one of the keys into visibility monitoring. But this is not an easy project. I mean, a lot of what I feel people are referring to for lack of visibility into human, non-human is the fact that just a system can create, especially in the cloud, you could do a lot of things that if you don't have the right governance, bypass all of your centralized architecture. So you could have the best centralized architecture, but in the cloud, you have a duplicate architecture that is very easy to use. So if the guardrails are not put in place, it's very easy to bypass them, and then you can just basically do whatever you want to do. So, scanning is one way to find these things. We literally scan codes for this. Let me just say that. So we scan software code looking for this kind of behavior. If someone has a reference in wiki pages, whatever. So there's no silver bullet for this. There's just so many ways you have to approach it. But yeah, I definitely agree with people that this could be very difficult to determine because you may not have that central repository, and you may have inherited multiple repositories, and you have to clean it up. And Lenin knows this is like a very difficult exercise to collapse these directories. It's not an easy project to bring them together.
Yeah, Lenin, would love for you to chime in if you have any additional thoughts there.
Sure. I mean, I think that the piece that we've always had, I've always struggled with across any project is, where are the identities and how do we find them, right? And one of the things, to the point made by Ramin, is how do we really get into a position where we stop the bleeding, right? So use a central solution for creating your identities, right? Maybe it's your IGA solution that you've integrated into all your apps and infrastructure, that no ID gets created without going through an IGA platform, right? So this way the life cycle of the identity begins there. So that's a very good way to actually stop the bleeding. But then how do you then go out and find those particular IDs or non-human IDs, right? And so you begin to try to identify either with scripts or searching or using the vulnerability, platform to find credentials across the board, using something like, a scanning solution to find them. So until you have and know where the identities are, then how do you really begin to manage them across the board? But the governance up front is, I think, where people need to focus, right? before, like, we have something called the Architecture Advisory Board, or the, where we actually go and present new solutions that come into production, and there they are actually forced to integrate into the identity framework. They are forced to get into our IGA solution. They're forced to do these things so that we know that where the identities are. I think to the challenge that Ramin had mentioned, this is how you then now find everything that's been out there for the last 20 years, right? And that's, I think, the challenge that continues to plague everyone along the way.
Yeah,
so if I can just jump in, one other thing that I want to mention is that one of the choke points you want to have is definitely in the authentication part. Yeah. If you can authenticate and you manage the authentication, which is Active Directory or Okta or Ping or whatever, then you can definitely find you because you should own that as part of the process, and making sure that you control the architecture from there onward. So as Lenin mentioned, once you find it, you need to give a solution. You got to put it in Cybersecurity. You need to do this. So having the steps, once you discover it, what to do with it is next. So don't allow people to authenticate to you.
100%.
Really good points. And there's a gentleman, Sean, in the chat. He said NHI governance and identification should be a pillar in regular IAM and identity hygiene. And I couldn't agree more. And I love, Sean, that you use the term identity hygiene, because I love those two words together, keeping your environments clean. I love it so much. I built a company that attaches to those two words together. So thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Got another little audience question I'd like to throw out there. I would love to hear from everybody again. There's a chat window if some of you have noticed, and I'd love, in maybe a word or two, if folks would feel comfortable to be able to chime in on where do you feel your organization has the biggest blind spots in identity security? Let me throw out some examples. Is it AD clutter? Is it database privileges? Maybe Unix accounts or service accounts or cloud, or maybe even new AI agents. So drop your answers in the chat. We're going to come back to those and see what folks are saying. And I'm going to ask you both, Ramin and Lenin, to chime in on that. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Ramin, I got another question for you. You've overseen lots of different identity environments. What's one lesson that consistently separates successful programs from those that stall or fail?
Oh, business alignment. That's always
100%.
If I can just say, yeah, that's without a doubt identity. So not many secure. So some secure. Well, let me just recap. There are security projects that are run that are not end user impacting. Mm-hmm. Identity is not one of them. Identity really impacts their users. When somebody joins the company, their first impression is how fast you give them access, how fast they have access to everything. When someone leaves the company, how fast you remove the access. So identity is one of those core areas where IT and business touch. So in identity management, you really need to have the business aligned, because anything you do is going to impact the business. So making sure that you don't disable an account without lots of advertising. I'm going to do this disabling, for example, because you could disable a service account that is running a very important business line. And I've done that, by the way. So don't do that without proper conversation. So it is very important that you actually have that business alignment right from the beginning and have their buyback into whatever project they're doing. They typically approve and agree, but they need to be aligned.
So if I may chime in, I think change management, and not from the change management, I got to open a ticket to make a change, but more so the business change management process, right? The alignment is perfect, because if you don't have, at our business, you have multiple CIOs and multiple business units. And so we do have to communicate the items that are coming, or when accounts maybe have needing certification and things of that nature does happen. So I think we're aligned there. Is when you actually have to come in, it's like, I have to make it more stringent to, increase our MFA strategy, or I have to make it more stringent to apply more SSO across the board, or I have to do these things. If the business is not aligned, then I become the project prevention team, right? Which is one of the things you want to avoid, right? Becoming the PPT, and it's not PowerPoint. So I think from that standpoint is where I think is the most important piece. But then the ability to actually make some sort of an agreement that if the changes are not made within a certain period of time, meaning the change management, the information, the actual implementation of the security tool, that there is some risk associated with not doing so, right? And explaining that risk across the board is how you again gain more alignment, and usually projects succeed a great deal better when you apply that risk lens along the way. If you don't have the ability to express what that looks like and what are the risks behind not doing something specific, then you end up stalling quite a bit. And particularly in identity, to Ramin's point, is we touch every application, every user, all the way up to the CEO, right? So we have to be lockstep in doing the appropriate communication and adoption of tooling along the way.
Interesting. And I think at the root of it, everyone has a little bit of concern about that friction, right?
Yes.
And I think there always is going to be a little bit of friction with the business when there's change, right? But it sounds like there's an intense desire and pressure to minimize that friction. Is that fair?
100%.
Very interesting, right? So the challenge we talked about actually isn't even technical, right? It's managing the business. Fascinating, really. So I see a lot of great comments in the chat. Just a quick reminder to everyone, throw those 1 or 2 words in there. I see service accounts a bunch. I think I saw AD clutter a bunch. We're going to come back to that chat to see what are those 1 or 2 words that everyone consistently mentions. But let's go back to our panelists over here. Maybe one more question or two, right? Would love to talk about identity complexity across environments, right? So, Lenin, I'm going to start with you this time. As organizations juggle, legacy, hybrid, and cloud environments, what do you think? And I think we talked a little bit about some of these already, but what are the most overlooked risks that leadership teams should prioritize to keep identity from becoming the weakest link?
I think, the non-human problem, I think, is going to continue to plague everyone, right? Everyone I talk to across the industry, that's like their biggest challenge, right? You have a lot of identities that you don't know where they are, but maybe in some cases don't even know what they do and when they actually do it, right? So that adds some additional level of complexity. So what you know, it's what you don't know that actually gives you some trouble most of the time, right? So from that standpoint, I think one of the things that that leaders in general need to prioritize from a, what do you do next standpoint is knowing where every identity is that's non-human, because it's going to be exacerbated by the complexities of AI. You're now today, for example, in the cloud, you've got your service principals, right? You have managed identities that actually are temporary in many cases. So making sure that you know where in each of those places are and what applications are using them is going to be, I think, key to address the problems and the complexity that you have out there. Not knowing those pieces and having the governance around those pieces is going to just increase complexity that it's already out there. And so that's, I think, where the focus would be and where leaders need to really pay attention.
Interesting. And Ramin, what do you think? Anything else you'd add there?
I just wanted to say the legacy, what is happening, at least if you had asked me that question of what were the biggest pain points, I wanted to say local service accounts in Linux platforms. The previous survey question that you had, or you were just talking about? Yeah, it's just like legacy systems that are not modernizing. So you have to keep maintaining very old architecture, as well as the business push to move to the new architecture. So this push and pull on either side is really at times frustrating and at times very complex. It adds a lot to the complexity of the architecture. And the more complex, what I always say to my team is the fact that you cannot patch complexity. This is one of the things that I like to say, because complexity is just difficult to manage and you don't know how something ended up from A to B or to Z. So getting rid of complexity should be the core message. And unfortunately, with legacy systems, they remain.
Yeah, in one of the things I saw here on the chat, I think Sean pointed it out, was the complexity of third-party apps, right? So in many cases, you have platform as a service with like ServiceNow and Workday and others that really create that extra layer of integration points that sometimes when they have to have interactions or integration with legacy systems. They do it via file consumption, right? And so that creates another level of problems along the way and complexity along the way. Those are the things that I think are continue to plague us for some time. Not knowing those IDs, not knowing where they sit, not knowing those identities are also going to be cumbersome along the way. So our goal always is any third-party app that can be integrated into those central systems is going to be key from a governance standpoint, right? And it should be for everyone that's on this call. They should really focus on doing that as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And kind of just scrolling through this chat, you definitely see folks talk about NHI a lot. I saw service accounts a lot, and service accounts actually is probably the most prolific type of NHI, right? So maybe let's hone in on that one for a minute. I'm curious, actually, why now? Why are people so intensely caring about service accounts, as an example, right? I've been thinking about service accounts, helping clients clean up their service accounts for years and years and years. But lately, it feels like the intensity is like tenfold. Why?
Ramin, can I take a gander at that first, please? I mean,
Please, go ahead.
It's like I'm dying on this one, and that's because I think, and this is kind of a data lens to it, right? What do people want and what do bad guys want is most of the time is your data, right? And service accounts usually have a ton of access to your data, but a service account can actually move laterally across the board to multiple systems. So not knowing exactly what entitlements that service account has created a lot of problems for a lot of industry, specific breaches that we've heard about, right? It's always some sort of a service account, some identity somebody had, or somebody got an access to a support person's ID, and then they got a service account, and then, it's sprawled from there, right? And then the issue continues to happen. So I think that's part of the reason why the focus is the easiest way into an organization is no longer by hacking in, right? It's by getting an identity, or whether it's by doing some sort of phishing and finding it that way, or actually getting into something that's exposed with a service account in place, right? So from our perspective, that's the reason why there's, I think, a lot of focus on it, because I think 90% of all breaches began with a service account issue. Back to you, Ramin.
Well, I think, Lenin, you said it very well. Every time we do a pen test in the past few years, and it has been mimicked basically a ransomware attack exercise. Service account is the loop that basically connects the bad guy to the data. So I think that was, Len mentioned it very well. So that's the main reason that we are basically suffering. The second part is the fact that with the advent of AI, service accounts are becoming used by the AI agents at times, and therefore there's more scrutiny into, okay, they may have had access, but they were using it. Going back to my original point that if they're beginning to use the access for scanning your data and providing responses to users, then we need to make sure the scope of the service account is known.
That makes a lot of sense. And Lenin, I loved what you said. It's not hacking in. I think you said it's logging in, right? That's the right now. It's so different than it was a few years ago, right?
100%. And so I think what organizations need to really begin doing is having that governance aspect of those service accounts, right? And about 3 firms now that I've been at, I have this method called the trifecta, right? Where is it in the vault? Is it in the IGA tool? And is it password rotated appropriately, right? Hopefully you want it to be done automatically for the password rotation. That's my word for automated. And so that needs to continue to go on. And if you don't have a good, baseline for that process happening on all those 3 things, then you end up getting yourself in trouble along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier, I think it was you, Lenin, that talked about, like, does this service account have access to one system or hundreds or thousands of systems?
That's
What's
right.
that blast radius look like, right? And
That's
from
right.
what I've seen, companies come to us a lot because they're stuck with service accounts, right? They don't know who owns it. They don't know if it's being used, what it's being used for, what the reach of it is it bolted? How do you actually bolt it? And how do you bolt it, not superficially, but actually change the password, kind of turn that lock, right? And it's a big problem, right? But it is interesting how this new modern world and the just dramatically expanded attack surface really kind of put people on the fast track to fix this problem once and for all. And again, this has existed for a long time. This is a sin of our past, right? But it is rewarding for me to see that folks are paying attention and not just kind of letting it slide like we all have for a very long time. Very cool. All right, so you guys ready for a little Q&A?
Sure.
All right. There's so many questions in the chat. I see so many questions in the actual behind the scenes Q&A. So hopefully we'll have time for a bunch of them. Let's start with the first one here. Is identity a bottleneck for the rapid growth of AI? I think I know how you guys might answer this, but let's see. Let's hear from you.
I start by saying yes, because a lot of AI projects go through security in order to make sure they go live. And identity can be a major preventer of that system going live. I'll give you an example. If you want to bring an AI system that, for example, goes and scans and creates a search directory for the company, like I have a global search, I can go to this AI and ask any questions about the company and it answers. Well, that means that system needs access to every system behind the scene. And in order to get that access, you need to have a very good architecture. So if you badly architecture, we will immediately prevent that system from going live. So that's an example of an AI wanting to go live and being prevented by security team.
Very interesting. Let me throw another one at you, a little bit of a different flavor. How do I get my leadership to appreciate the importance of identity visibility?
That's an incredible question, and hopefully we can get you some answers here. One of the things that I think happened, not here, but at a previous company I was at, is every time there was a pen test, we actually found ourselves with another service account having some trouble, right? And meaning that they could find it and they can do some stuff. The red team used to find them all the time, right? At where I worked previously. And so I think that's we were actually able to build a point of view as to, and maybe this is an idea for you, Rita, and your team, your marketing team, is how do I make the case for finding out how many actual, identities are out there that no one knows anything about, right? And so what I have done every time I've had this problem is putting a lens risk around it, right? If you go to the dark web, for example, and an account happens to find 15 social security numbers, what are they worth, right? Now amplify that by 5 to 10,000. And then you add, there's some calculations out there on the net that actually talk about the reputational damage or the payout for what some of those breaches have cost. And you can actually build a model. And so I've done that every time I've had to justify going to find those accounts, right? And so when that amount equals millions of dollars, sometimes I can come back and say, if this happens, 'cause it's only a matter of time, this is what should be out. And so that makes the conversation a lot easier. In some instances, accounts, service accounts or other accounts in a platform cost money, right, to maintain, to keep out there. What I mean by that is if it's a subscription model, you actually end up having to pay per subscription for each account. So finding the money for that. But really it comes down to a money and risk reward kind of piece, right? What is the risk and then what's the reward? And that's how you are actually able to build a model around how to sort of speak, sell it to the business.
I love that. Ramin, what do you think?
I just wanted to say a mature organization from a cybersecurity perspective should spend between 30 to 40% of their money when it comes to their security budget in identity management. If they're not, that means they're under-investing. That's really key. And if they are under-investing, I would recommend, you can do a pen test. You have to educate your management and the CISO that the budget has to be allocated. And I think Lenin mentioned at the beginning, if identity management is not reporting to the CISO, then that's a major problem. That is really means that the keys to the kingdom are not managed by security.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So a couple of takeaways I got out of this, right? So definitely about the blind spots. You can't protect what you don't know exists, and show examples of that, right? And show the impact in a few ways, right? And the risk versus reward, so true. And, the 30 to 40% of the budget metric, Ramin, I actually didn't know that. So that's really interesting. But I also agree where it sits matters. Where it sits absolutely matters.
Yeah, I
Very
mean, Gartner can provide you that data.
Mm-hmm.
So you should
Interesting.
be able to use that metric.
And it's a partnership in many cases between infrastructure and security. But I think, if in fact the identity and access management piece, I mean, you're as a security practitioner in charge of securing those identities. In many cases, the teams and infrastructure, great people, please, I'm not disparaging anyone, but they're in charge of speeds and feeds, right? Doing it as fast as possible with as minimum time as possible so that I can actually add the value that I need to add. And so I think just the balance between the two is critical to make sure it's successful.
That's a really good point, infra versus security. And definitely in some of our larger customers, what we've seen is security will essentially do the find it part. They'll want to understand the policies where there's violations to their controls, but the fix it lives with infrastructure because they own the machines where the risk is sitting. So interesting, right? But how do they portion their time effectively, and how do they balance speed versus security, right?
Right.
Got to be a hard balance for those teams, right?
100%. And one of the things I'll tell you this, Rita, right? There's a tool, a little known tool that I think we all are very fond of, that was able to use to kind of give me some insight and free up those infrastructure teams for actually having to write scripts to get me those accounts, right? It's your company. It's your company, Rita. It's your company. But I think the idea is that, again, it's a partnership, right? If I'm able to help them save time, then they're usually very amiable to help me fix the issues. So.
No, that's great. Awesome. Let me switch gears a little bit because actually, Ramin, there's a person, Marshall, that actually wanted to make a comment and have a chat about something you mentioned around the cleanup of access, right? But also the cleanup of data, right? And I know Lenin knows a thing or two about this, right? And he said that it's not surprising that many entities hold on to old data, isolate and archive the old stuff is what he recommends, but everyone's scared to hit the delete key.
Yep.
Right? Let's talk about that, right? Like there's risk there, but everyone's scared about that retention policy. What do you guys think about that?
Well, from a retention perspective, you have some legal requirements in many cases, right? You also have some legal requirements to delete certain things. And even when they have legal requirements to delete them, like GDPR, among other things, they're actually scared to do that. And so I think data retention policies and the practices of data management is critical to address it. In many organizations, scanning for that data, finding duplicates is key. But the problem is when you have too much of it, then you got to worry about the access to it, right? Old backups, old drives, old things out there. And so that's the other piece that's I think going to continue to be a problem for most along the way. But for example, Rita, there are some organizations that have a problem deleting accounts that have been stale for a year, right? They're like, well, what if one of these days it wakes up and has to do something, right? And so I think people are getting much more comfortable with deleting those accounts, but it's still definitely a challenge along the way. It's one of the things that we do and we have done is whenever we find accounts that are not being used, we disable them for a period of time, right? And we change the password on it and see if something breaks when it's necessary, and then we go from there. Only when it hasn't been used for a long time, right? So that's how we've actually been able to tackle that problem.
Well, you mentioned see if it breaks, right? And I think a lot of people go with that approach, right? Because the truth is, like, you need a little bit of friction, or you can't avoid a little bit of friction, right? But there are definitely ways, especially with identity, that you can kind of minimize the fear that making a change is going to break a system. Like one of the things that we like to talk about, and let's talk about service accounts again, right? Is it's one thing to know a service account exists and understand, where it may have access, but what if it's running a scheduled task? What if it's part of an app pool, right? Like, so understanding how it's used and then who's the owner. You can confirm some of those what ifs. Like you can engage with the business by giving them information that they'll understand to make them feel comfortable working with you to schedule that change, to let their end users know that there's a change, right? But you have to empower those owners with information in order for them to want to collaborate with you, right?
Very true. I mean, you mentioned that if you send them a vague email, say, please, we're going to do this, I'm going to turn off this account without giving them the context, It's that intersection that I was talking about before between the technology team and the business. And if you don't have that right, the friction can grow very severe. You need to have a lot of data.
Yeah, so sometimes I think, sorry to interrupt you, Ramin. Sometimes I think like people come and go from companies all the time. People move departments all the time. Is keeping that catalog of accounts with the appropriate owner all the time is important, which is one of the reasons why a lot of our platforms and systems sit in the IGA solution, so that we know when things change, that at some point somebody's going to have to be accountable for making those changes. So that's also key.
Yeah, and there was a comment made by Sandeep over here. He said one of the biggest problems is identifying source and target, right? Service account, but where is it actually used, right? So scanning's only as good as static values. Totally agree, Sandeep. And if we can't identify where and how they're used, right? Like there's not much you can do, right? You're kind of like a blind person with a remediation machine gun, kind of hoping and praying nothing breaks.
Yeah. You got to use that method sparingly. That's for sure, right?
Very cool. So I think we might have time for one more question, right? This is from Ahmed. Ahmed asked, what is the one question about AI and identity security that you believe every board member should be asking but isn't? Oh, that's a good one, Ahmed.
Wow. I mean, I can come up with a technical question they should be asking, but I share with you what I tell my CIO what he should ask. The question is, should the identity run as a user or as a service account? It's a big decision point that you have to make right from the beginning as an AI agent of which direction am I going? Am I going in the user direction or the architecture that is based on service accounts? And at least in my case, I have been preventing the service accounts go live with that architecture, pushing towards a user architecture that is the user known. We are doing that based on an OAuth architecture, etc., not based on a service account architecture, because I know with the service account architecture, this goes crazy.
Very interesting. Lenin, what do you think?
So I think it's actually a much more basic question that I'm thinking about in my head, right? It is our identity platforms, are they ready for an AI, world that's coming down our way, right? And tell me how you've done to get us ready for it. I think that is the question every board member should ask from a security team or a CISO, right? I think if we can articulate that, well, then I think we're going to get ourselves in trouble. So I think that's what we should be focused on answering on anybody that asks us that question, whether it's a business leader directly or a board member along the way.
Very cool. Well, Jess isn't back yet, so I think I can squeeze in one more question. You guys good with that? One more?
Yeah.
All right, so this is from Julian. Oh, hey, Julian, good to see you here. He said, as Rita mentioned, no one wants to hit the delete key on stale data. All right, we're going to go back to the data dialogue. Cool. How do we go about getting the CIO to support this effort? How do we build a business case? That's a tough one, Julian. Good
Can I just
question.
say that the delete button is dependent more than just the CIO. Typically, the delete button depends on compliance, the legal teams. They're the ones who make the decision. The CIO wants to press the button and save the money.
That's right.
It's the compliance team that says no. And they typically say no. I mean, as Lenin mentioned, it could be based on how many years you are. But like, in our case, if you're operating out of, let's say, China, you suddenly end up with a 15-year retention because that one country has it. The rest of the global architecture should have it. So one country can suddenly change your entire retention policy by years. And then there's always that fear of what happens if I press this and then somebody comes, asks for it tomorrow. So it's typically the compliance team, I wanted to say, that make that decision, not us.
Yeah, and the data security team in our group is doing a lot of work with the data management team, right? And they are coming up with, well, I found this many duplicates of stuff. So if you can't do anything else, talk to your CIO about how many duplicates of the same data are out there, and do we really need that? And I think you'll find some reason a lot of organizations like to save duplicates of duplicates of duplicates because they might need it at some point, right? I've ran into this my entire career. And so I think that's where you can begin to say, hey, look how much I found and look what I've saved in terms of duplicates. And usually you get some headway there. Although that's definitely probably another hour of discussion as to how most of us have done it along the way.
That was my cue. I was like, I wish we could do another hour.
This is so much fun.
I know. I hate that I have to be the bearer of bad news. We have to wrap it up. This has been incredible.
Well, thank you, Lenin. Thank you, Ramin. So much appreciate your very precious time. And Jess, you were a killer host. Awesome.
I don't know, Rita, you did all the heavy lifting of hosting today. Did you guys see the chat has been on fire?
It's
we
been
need
great.
to get to all the questions.
I know. Okay, but Rita, here's what we're going to do. And this is good for everyone in the audience to hear. All of the questions that you asked, we are going to make sure get sent to the team. So you are going to get responses back from Sphere, which also means that if you still have a burning question rolling around your head, get it into the Q&A right now, and we will make sure that you get a follow-up. Boy, team, I got to tell you, this has been one of the coolest fireside chats. I was on the edge of my seat, and I was on the edge of my standing mat the entire time. Thank you guys so much. What a wonderful chat.
It was wonderful. Thank you so very much. And I look forward to doing it again, Rita. I have much more stuff that's coming into my head that I'd love to talk about.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Ramin, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
That's how you want to leave a conversation, right? Is with it, there always being more things we could have talked about, being more things that we want to dive in and explore. I love that kind of conversation when it lights you up and leaves you ready for the next chat. So we'll have to have you guys all back again soon. And I do want to, again, just shout out the incredible experience of the chat today. Love the interactiveness. You guys definitely got the memo this morning and brought all the great questions and reflections. I love that. If you are looking for a little bit of a way that you can get a little bit more information, I just want to call out that book a demo link that is in the docs tab right now is the best way to jump in and take this conversation one step further, because this is how you can dig into where you can see some of these changes happening or improvements becoming possible and real in your organization. So take a second right now, click on the docs tab, open up that link, and just hold on to that. Sign up and get your demo. Don't go anywhere just yet, because we do have a few more things before we wrap up our day together today. I do want to say very quickly that Deanna is actually going to open up a survey for all of you. We would love your feedback on what you thought. Are we hitting you with the right information in the right way? I know all of our speakers are just going to get 5 out of 5 out of 5 today, but please do take a second and fill out that survey for us. That's open for you, and make sure you've got that book a demo tab open. Last but not least, we do have our $250 Amazon gift card that is going to go to someone who is here live and present at the webinar and meeting all of those wonderful actual tech media prize terms and conditions. Again, linked for you in that handy dandy docs tab. It's got all the great info in there. All right, today's winner is let's see, we've got Sholami Farrell from California. Sholami Farrell of California. Congratulations to you, Sholami. As always, we will get in touch about claiming your prize after we wrap up the webinar, so stay tuned for that. All right, well, we are at that time. We are at that moment. We are going to bring things to a close. So with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to express a very sincere and deep thank you to Sphere for making this event possible, especially to Rita for leading us through that conversation, a really wonderful and active host. I have to do this every day, so as somebody who sees the good, the bad, and the ugly of speakers, Rita, nailed it. Amazing. Well done. Lenin and Ramin, thank you for bringing such honest reflections. I think that we got to hear from you today. Again, thinking in the high level and the way ahead and the way forward, but also getting into some of those tactical action steps. And I know that it's not always easy to reflect back on the experiences that we're in, and both of you brought a lot of openness and insightful reflections, I think, that will be very helpful for the audience. So a big thank you to all three of you. To our wonderful audience out there, as I said, gold stars stars across the board, just shiny, sparkly gold stars for everybody. Thank you all for attending, for asking some incredible questions. Again, stay tuned for answers in follow-up. I'm so glad that all of you could be here with us to be a part of this. You know, I think that we're walking away feeling all lit up and ready to continue these conversations in our organizations. Again, whether you are that leadership role in your organization or you want to go book a coffee with your leader and kind of dig in and start exploring. So I hope you're feeling inspired and equipped to take on some of those challenges in your organization. I know that I've learned a ton, and I am sure you're feeling that same way as well. I hope that I get to see all of you at a webinar again soon. And until then, have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks all.